Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive from Peaceful Rooster Experience.
Yeah.
Last time we touched on information asymmetry. We were talking about Freakonomics.
Right.
That was a really fascinating book. And one of the things that they talked about in there really stuck with me.
Okay.
It was about the Ku Klux Klan
Oh, yeah.
and how basically this group, shrouded in secrecy,
Mm-hmm.
they were ultimately undone by a lack of information. Kind of a wild thought, right?
Yeah, it is pretty interesting. I mean, you think that, having secret information is powerful.
Right.
But, they were brought down because they didn't have the information they needed.
Well, it's almost like a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's one of the things we're going to dig into today.
Exactly.
The whole concept of information asymmetry. So maybe we could start there. What is it? What does information asymmetry really mean?
So, information asymmetry. We can dress it up with fancy words, but at the end of the day, it's pretty simple. It's basically when one side in a transaction, in a deal, in just a conversation even, knows way more than the other side.
Okay, so like a used car salesman. I mean, that's the classic example, right?
Yeah, that's the one that always comes to mind.
Right.
I mean, they know the car's history, they know all its problems, and you, as the buyer, you're kind of going in blind.
You're hoping for the best. But it's way more than just used cars.
Oh, yeah.
It's like everyday life is full of information asymmetry.
Exactly.
I mean, picking a health insurance plan,
Uh-huh.
trying to figure out if you're getting a good deal on your cell phone contract, even something as simple as, picking a restaurant for dinner.
Yeah.
You're always relying on information that you may or may not have.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're making the best decision you can with what you got,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes you're really at a disadvantage.
You really are. And that's where it's important to kind of be aware of this concept of information asymmetry, because when you're aware of it, you can start asking the right questions.
Yeah.
You can try to level the playing field a little bit.
Right. And that's why we're doing this deep dive. We're not just talking about theory here.
Yeah.
We want to give people practical tools
Yeah.
to deal with this stuff.
Exactly.
So let's get into some real world examples. I was reading this other content brief the other day,
Okay.
and it was talking about the healthcare system, how doctors, obviously they have years of training.
Right.
They have so much specialized knowledge. That's a good thing,
Right.
right?
Yours.
And we want our doctors to be experts. But that also creates a situation where there's a huge information gap between the doctor and the patient.
Absolutely. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, you want your doctor to know more than you.
Right.
But it can be intimidating. It can be hard to ask the right questions. You might not even know what questions to ask.
And you might feel pressured to just go along with
Yes.
whatever the doctor recommends, even if you're not totally comfortable.
Exactly. And that's why it's important to do your research.
Mm-hmm.
Get a second opinion if you need to. Be your own advocate.
So we've talked about used cars. We've talked
Oh.
about healthcare.
Right.
But I think one area where information asymmetry is like really, really impactful is in the financial markets.
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the financial markets, think about it, it's all about information. Who has it, who doesn't, when they get it. And there are so many ways that this asymmetry can play out.
Well, and it can have huge consequences, like insider trading.
Oh, yeah, the classic example. Someone knows something that the public doesn't know.
Right.
And they use that information to make a killing in the market. It's illegal for a reason. It undermines the whole system.
It really does. But it's not always as blatant as insider trading.
Right.
It can be much more subtle, like the way that companies release information to investors through their earnings reports or during an IPO. I mean, they have a lot of leeway
Yeah.
in how they present that information. And let's be honest, they're going to spend it in the most favorable light possible.
Oh, absolutely. And it's up to the investors to try to read between the lines, do their due diligence,
Right.
try to figure out what's really going on.
So we've painted a pretty, maybe a bit of a bleak picture here.
Yeah.
It seems like information asymmetry is everywhere.
It is.
And it can be really hard to combat. But I think the important thing is that companies are starting to recognize that this is a problem,
They are.
that it erodes trust.
Yeah.
It can damage their reputation.
Yeah.
And they're starting to put things in place to try to address it. What are some of those things?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is transparency.
Mm-hmm.
Companies are realizing that being more open about how they do business, being upfront about their pricing, where their products come from, all of that builds trust with customers, with investors, with everyone.
And think about something you mentioned earlier, open source software. That seems like the ultimate in transparency. Right,
It really is. I mean, the code is right there for anyone to see.
right.
You can examine it, you can contribute to it, you can even modify it if you want to. It really empowers people.
So transparency is one piece of the puzzle,
It is.
but there's got to be more.
There is.
What are some other strategies that companies are using?
Well, I think another really important one is aligning incentives.
Okay. Explain that one to me.
So basically, it's about making sure that everyone involved in a deal has a reason to want the same outcome.
So like a win-win situation.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, for example, think about a real estate agent. A good real estate agent is going to work to make sure that both the buyer and the seller feel like they got a fair deal.
Oh, I see.
So they're providing information to both sides, they're facilitating communication, they're really trying to create a situation where everyone benefits.
Okay. So transparency, aligning incentives.
Yeah.
What about risk mitigation? How does that fit in?
Oh, that's crucial. Companies need to put safeguards in place to protect everyone involved. Because information asymmetry can really lead to some bad outcomes if it's not managed properly.
So we're talking about things like regulations.
Right. Okay.
Things like consumer protection laws.
Uh-huh.
Those are all designed to kind of level the playing field a little bit.
Exactly. Try to minimize the risks that come with these information imbalances.
So it seems like companies are really starting to take this seriously. But I wonder, technology has played such a huge role in our lives and in the business world.
Absolutely.
Has it made information asymmetry better or worse?
That's a great question. And I think the answer is it's kind of both.
Oh, okay.
On the one hand, the internet has given us access to more information than ever before.
Right.
We can research anything, we can compare prices, we can read reviews, we can connect with companies directly. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, technology has also made it easier for companies to collect massive amounts of data about us. They know what we buy, what we search for online, where we go. It's a little creepy when you think about it.
It is. And that creates a whole new kind of information asymmetry, right?
Yes, exactly.
Because now companies have this incredibly detailed picture of us.
Yes.
And they can use that information in ways that we may not even be aware of.
Right.
For marketing, for pricing,
Right.
who knows what else.
It's a brave new world. But I think, the takeaway here is that information asymmetry is constantly evolving.
Yeah.
It's always going to be there in some form. But understanding the concept, understanding the different ways that it can play out, that's what gives you the power to navigate it effectively.
So as we wrap up, what's the most important thing for our listeners to remember about information asymmetry?
Well, first of all, remember that it's everywhere.
Okay.
And second, don't be afraid to ask questions. Do your research. Be your own advocate. The more you know, the better off you'll be.
And on that note, here's a final thought for everyone to consider. We've talked about how companies are gathering more and more data about us and how that creates new forms of information asymmetry. So here's the question. In the age of big data, are we actually becoming more vulnerable? It's something to think about.
It is.
And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, keep those minds curious.
Absolutely.